Hello, it's Simon Zutshi here. In this video, we're going to talk about politics. Now, I don't normally like to talk about politics, but it's going to be more a reference to how it affects you and your property investing. And should we be worried about who is elected to become the leaders of our country? I do want to start talking about, obviously, America. We've just heard that Donald Trump has successfully been elected as the 47th president of the USA, and he was actually 45th president of the USA as well. And I find it slightly fascinating that someone who has been convicted of being a criminal still gets to become the president of the USA. But I suppose the important thing is that once he's president, he'll be able to pardon himself of any previous crimes anyway. However, and I don't know if Donald Trump is going to be good for America or not. Certainly from a business point of view, the businesses have reacted very well. The stock market's gone up. Cryptocurrency have gone up. I hear from people in America that, a lot of people are worried about, what might happen for women in America, what might happen for races in America. And actually, maybe one of the reasons Donald Trump was very successful was he was running against the first potential female president. And many people in America really didn't want that, which would have definitely helped Donald Trump's election. So who knows what's going to happen? We're going to have to wait and see there. Bringing it back to the UK, of course, and obviously the Labour government have just released their budget. We'll touch on that in a moment. But interestingly that the Labour Party, and many people are saying this was a landslide election victory, and it was a landslide election victory, and Donald Trump saying it's the biggest election victory in American history. Well, when you kind of dig below the numbers, we've seen that in the UK, this landslide election victory was maybe not such a victory as people claim. There's no doubt that Labour are in there, the government, they have all this power now because they have so many seats. But when you dig into the numbers, it appears that Keir Starmer's government actually got less people voting for them than Jeremy Corbyn had last time that he was running to try and beat the Tories, and the Tories won and became the government, obviously. And isn't it interesting how a sway in opinion can have such a dramatic effect in the results? I think we saw a lot of traditional conservative voters decide not to vote for the Conservatives this summer because maybe some of the policies don't exactly support entrepreneurs and business owners, which is what Conservatives are supposed to do. And I think the Conservatives misguidedly went to try and get votes from renters and tenants who are probably never going to really vote for Conservatives anyway. And the result is the Conservatives lost and the Labour Party have become the new government. And maybe the Conservative Party deserve that because of some of the way they've been behaving over the last term. Now, I do think, by the way, it's worth saying that actually I think the Conservatives did an amazing job during the unprecedented lockdown and COVID time. It was a very, very difficult time. And interestingly, the Labour government are complaining of what terrible debt they've inherited this country in from the Conservatives. But actually, the Labour Party were wanting the government to spend more money during COVID than they actually spent. So I think the Conservatives probably did the best they could. Some of the other policies, I don't think so good. But let's talk about this. Let's talk about the difference between the Labour government now, as they are, and the Conservative Party, the former government. Although there are political divides and differences, I wonder how much different they are ultimately. And let me give you some examples here. So the recent budget was very interesting. Many people, myself included, felt that there was going to be an increase in capital gains tax because the Labour government had made it very clear they wanted the tax burden to fall on the shoulders of the wealthy people. And if someone has assets like shares, property, crypto, whatever, you might think maybe they're a more wealthier person. And so prior to this government, the Labour government, the Conservative government had changed capital gains tax. They had said, well, if you have non-property assets like stocks, you pay capital gains either 10 or 20% based on your personal tax rate, either a lower or higher rate. But they'd already made property capital gains 18 or 24%, depending on your personal tax rate. So the Labour government decided to level this up a little bit and increase capital gains, not for property, but for non-property assets. So now everybody currently pays 18% capital gains tax if they're a lower tax rate payer and 24% if they are higher tax rate payer. And I expected maybe an increase to 24%. I think that's because the Labour Party had very carefully leaked lots of things. They try and make something look really, really bad. And when they actually bring it in, people go, oh, it's not as bad as we thought it was going to be, which is what many people are saying about property and capital gains tax. However, I think the ground has been set for potential rises in capital gains tax over time. Now, apparently one of the reasons they didn't go up to 40% was HMRC did the numbers and worked out if capital gains went up to 40%, it would be too much of a disincentive. People would not sell their properties, thus they'd actually get less revenue from capital gains tax than at the current rates. So I think the Labour government have probably done a wise move there by increasing tax on wealthier people. The Labour government have said they want to get a £40 billion increase in taxes because they want to spend a lot more money. And the majority of that, £25 billion, comes from the changes to national insurance for employers. Now, obviously, that's kind of interesting. It means that the average person is not going to be paying more tax losing tax from their salary. In fact, they've increased the minimum wage by 6.7%. But my concern is this, and this is why it's going to impact property investing. My concern is that when we see the rates of inflation go up. Now, inflation is supposed to be around the 2% target of the Bank of England. Obviously, we've just recently seen the Bank of England news about interest rates. But the point is that if inflation starts to go up again, we might see interest rates start to go up. We know that is a tool that the Bank of England use, a macroeconomic tool to control inflation, is by putting interest rates up. And if the minimum wage has gone up by 6.7%, if the Labour government is pandering to requests from all the unions and they're demanding higher than inflation wage increases, I see we might get a return to higher inflation and we might see interest rates go up, which is obviously something that's not going to be very good for us as property investors. The Tory government were adamant they wanted to bring down inflation, and obviously they had their whole austerity campaign about spending less money, and Rachel Reeves made it very clear that the difference between the Conservatives who wanted austerity and the Labour government is no austerity. They are going to increase spend. They're trying to spend their way out of the problem. They need to, they say they want to stimulate businesses, which is interesting, bringing in that national insurance contribution for employers. And I think employers are going to be a bit more cautious about who they employ. They might well reduce their staff count. So actually that might cause an increase in unemployment. For us as property investors, if we're renting properties out to people on lower incomes, who might be on minimum wages or working in warehouses or shops or factories, offices, well, maybe it's a good thing for them to have more money in the pocket. They're going to be able to afford the rent in our HMOs. And HMOs, we're providing a cost-effective form of accommodation, much more cost-effective than someone living in their own property, where as well as the rent, they also have to pay all the bills, because generally in an HMO, we include all the bills. Now, we do well because we get rent from lots of people. That adds up to give us a really good cash flow, but also it's really good for the tenants. And I love to get win-win. We're investing in property. I want it to be a win-win for the tenants and also a win-win for us. And HMOs is a great solution. By the way, if you do HMOs, you need to make sure they're very high-end HMOs. Do not do average HMOs like most investors, because there is an oversupply of those. If you do really high-end HMOs, you're going to get much better tenants who have lower void periods and make more money from your property and create this real kind of co-living community. That's exactly what we should be doing in HMOs. So anyway, back to comparison between Labour and also Conservatives. Now, one thing that I heard a very interesting comment that was, if the Labour Party make lots of changes and let's see how they do over the next 4 or 5 years, it might well be that we get the Conservatives back in next time, because I think many typical Conservative voters who decided either not to vote for the Conservatives or to vote for Lib Dem or the Reform Party I think that we will see a lot of these people maybe come back to vote for Conservatives, having realised they really didn't want Labour in. So it wasn't so much a massive victory for Labour, it was more a protest vote against the Conservative Party and some of the things they've been doing. So let me talk about something that the Conservative Party did very surprisingly. They changed entrepreneurs relief. So entrepreneurs relief used to be, if you sold a business for £10 million, on the first £10 million, you would only pay 10% tax. So you pay £1 million instead of £2 million tax. So this is a great incentive. But they decided to reduce that down to just 1 million. And obviously they changed the name to Business Asset Disposal Relief. And it's only £1 million. And it's on the first £1 million, you pay 10% tax. Now, that's not as good as 10 million, right? And it's a real disincentive. But I thought, okay, there's still incentive to build and grow a profitable business that employs lots of people. However, I expected the Labour Party to get rid of it, but they didn't. But instead, they changed it. They said, well, it's 10% now. And in 2025, it's going to be 14% tax. And then by 2026, it'll be 18% tax. So really, they're getting rid of it over time, which is a shame because the Labour government say they want to stimulate business. That's how they're going to grow the economy. It doesn't really feel like they're doing that. And many entrepreneurs and business owners and millionaires say they're actually going to leave the UK, which will be a real shame. It's a real shame you have a brain drain and people are not here creating jobs, creating employment, and obviously paying taxes. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens because of what the Labour government are doing. But it's interesting, will a new government, would a Conservative government come and reverse some of the things that the Labour government are doing in their term? Well, I think they probably won't do that because there's a benefit to have someone else do your dirty work for you. The reality is all governments need to raise taxes to pay for everything we have in this country. We have an amazing health service. And yes, it is creaking at the seams. And yes, it's underfunded. And interesting, talking about politics, I think that Nigel Farage is a bit too far right, personally. Some of his immigration policies, I think, are not very good. However, I heard him on a podcast talking recently, and he was talking about the fact that, the civil service is massively inefficient, and actually maybe there should be serious cuts in the civil service. The amount that civil servants get paid for their pensions is absolutely ridiculous, and often there's no accountability in the civil service. So it's interesting, a lot of politicians talk common sense, and we can take little bits from each person, but it's a shame that we don't have somebody or a party that it feels like is doing the best for the UK. So we're going to have to see. I think there's not that much difference when it comes down to it between the Conservatives and the Labour Party because they've actually been moving towards the same thing. And it feels to me that they're increasing taxes, both of them, and unfortunately not doing a great job in helping the growth of this country. So we're going to have to see what happens with the Labour government over the next term, next 4 or 5 years. We might get a new government in next time. It depends. It really depends on what the Labour government actually do. My final point I'm going to say on this video is that sometimes we worry. We worry about what happens if this happens, what happens if that happens. There's no point worrying until things actually change, and then we simply adapt and grow. And I think there's going to be a huge opportunity for the next few months for you to get out and secure some amazing deals. And yes, you're going to have to pay more stamp duty, but go out and secure those deals because there's really not that much competition. At the end of the day, we do not have enough accommodation in the UK, and all governments are making it harder for us as investors to be private landlords. But there's still a demand. If there weren't private landlords providing much needed accommodation in the private rental sector, we really would be in a massive problem. Rents would be much higher. There would not be enough accommodation. So we perform an important role providing affordable accommodation for people. And yes, all businesses, we want to make a profit doing that, but it's a win-win helping people. So is it the end of property investing? I don't think so. Doesn't matter which political party happens to be the government. I don't think it makes that much difference. We just adapt, we get on, and we make the most of it. So I do hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like the video. Come and comment below. What do you think about what's happening in politics in 2024? Make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to make sure you're notified anytime one of these timely videos come out. Until next time, I encourage you to invest with knowledge, invest with skill.